Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me in the Bettor's Box. This is ATS.io's MLB betting podcast for Friday, March 12th. I'm your host, Adam Burke. Over at ATS.io, you can check out my 2021 MLB betting guide. That's been getting a lot of run, a lot of publicity, a lot of really positive feedback here of late as well. That's got team previews for all 30 Major League Baseball teams with a win total pick on each and every one of them. Also, some good fantasy application with how I break down some of the individual players in those team previews. Also, division futures, pennant futures, World Series futures, AL NL MVP, AL NL Cy Young, and the Home Run King. You check that out over at ATS.io. You can get the PDF from my Twitter page at Skating Tripods and get yourself ready for that Major League Baseball season here, which is now less than 3 weeks away, beginning on April 1st. You can also read the guide in the ATS app, which you can download in the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. Full article integration with that app. It's a bet tracker. It's an odds screen, a stats database in there to help you handicap, and where you can buy a subscription to the premium model that's in there, $9.99 a week, $19.99 a month, to get that premium model over in that ATS app. Next week, of course, the NCAA tournament begins on Friday. We'll have podcasts throughout the week. Next Friday, I will do another edition of the Bettor's Box you can listen to at your leisure. Obviously, it's the first round of the tournament, so everyone's going to be focused on that. But trying to get through all of the division previews here. And actually, with that, a note here at the top of today's show. So I wound up sleeping in. I got about 9.5 hours to sleep over 3 nights in Vegas here this week. So my wife quietly sneaks out this morning for work, allows me to sleep in 8:30 or woke up at 9:30. That's about an hour and a half later than I usually start my day with all my ATS responsibilities. So going to do just the AL Central here today because got a late start. And furthermore, with that late start, I don't know if you follow me on Twitter at Skating Tripods, but right before I left for Vegas, got the blue screen of death on my computer. So I had to work on that here this morning, trying to figure that whole thing out. I think I've put enough duct tape on the boat to let this ship set sail here for today. Not sure it's completely fixed, but it's working for now, and that's about the best I can do with it. So, again, just doing the AL Central here today. Next week, I'll do the AL West and the NL East, and then we'll do the NL Central, and I'll find a way to work in the NL West at some point here before the start of the Major League Baseball season to get some thoughts out on all of these divisions. I guess one thing I will talk about here really quickly is that I was going to talk about this next Friday, so I don't have any notes prepared on it. But real quickly, I'm going to talk about which spring training stats matter and which ones don't. Because we're seeing a lot of offense, of course, as we always do, with the games being played in Arizona and in Florida. Two very good environments for the baseball. The ball carries well, especially in Arizona. We see a lot of teams that play in Arizona, hit for a lot of power and all of that. So we are seeing quite a bit of offense here for this current spring training season, as we do pretty much year in and year out. Now, there are a few caveats to that. The first is, again, you've got guys pitching in these games that are not making the major league rosters. So that is a part of it where you've got proven major league hitters facing guys that simply aren't on their level. Second, especially early in spring training. And now we're reaching the point with 20 days left until the start of the season where pitchers will start to kind of hone in on, smoothing out some of the rough edges. But early in spring training, those first 2 or 3 appearances, guys might throw exclusively fastballs, just trying to work on their fastball command. Guys might throw exclusively breaking balls. Maybe they'll throw 60, 70% sliders in their appearance, just because they don't have a feel for that pitch and they want to work through it in spring training. So you don't want to read too much into pitcher stats. You certainly don't want to read too much into the hitter stats either. A thing like Trevor Bauer, and it kind of made the rounds, not in his most recent spring training appearance, but the one prior to that, pitching with one eye closed. And everyone's just like, this arrogant asshole, this and that. Look, to me, the way I interpreted it was that Bauer wanted to work to one side of the plate as much as he could, or maybe challenge himself to work to the other side of the plate where his eye wasn't open, just relying on the natural movement of his pitches and all of that. So I think he was just simply working on something, working on an experiment. There was something he didn't like in his throwing sessions that he was working on. And these things happen a lot in spring training. So I don't read a whole lot into most of the statistics that are out there because you've got guys working on things, experimenting with new pitches. You've got hitters facing guys that they'll never face because those guys will be selling insurance or used cars or something like that when they're not in any Major League Baseball organization anymore. So these are things that you want to put a lot of context to in spring training. Now, which spring training stats do matter? Stats that matter are stats that reach a point of significance or stabilization at a very low sample size. Some of the stats that fall into that category are things like batted ball type, ground balls, fly balls. Line drives take a little bit longer to stabilize, but ground balls and fly balls do stabilize at a very low sample size of batted balls in play. So if you notice that somebody's writing about, or maybe you're looking at spring training stats and notice that a guy is hitting more fly balls, that's probably a concerted effort to do that. That's probably a launch angle adjustment that will carry over to the season. So if you've got fantasy drafts coming up or something like that, guys that are hitting more fly balls here in spring training, that's probably a concerted effort to do that, a philosophical change, a change to the physical approach, because batted ball types stabilize at a very low sample size. So if you notice a guy's hitting more fly balls, that is a change that I think is very likely to carry over to the regular season. And in that same breath, exit velocity actually stabilizes at a pretty low number of batted balls, much lower than you would anticipate. And basically what we're saying here is that guys that hit the ball hard are almost always going to hit the ball hard. Now, again, you do have the caveats in play here of maybe they're making loud, violent contact against AA, AAA pitchers, fringe relievers to the roster, stuff like that. Yeah, that's a possibility. But exit velocity does stabilize at a pretty low rate. Now, for pitchers, it reaches a point of significance at a low rate. But interestingly enough, the reliability of that number actually goes down once you get a very large sample size. And I think that's just largely due to pitchers making adjustments and stuff like that. Hitters, it's more difficult to make adjustments to your swing, to getting around to the baseball, to making high velocity contact than it is for pitchers to change their grips, move to one side of the rubber or the other, change their pitches, stuff like that. But overall, batted ball types and exit velocities are two things that are worth paying attention to in spring training. And another one that oddly enough stabilizes at a pretty low rate are strikeouts and walks. Strikeouts and walks generally stabilize and reach a point of significance and reliability with a relatively small sample size. So if you see pitchers that are striking a lot of guys out, there probably is something to that, whether it's an increase in velocity, difference in pitch arsenal and pitch usage and repertoire, something like that. Those are things that typically tend to hang around. Now, of course, again, the usual caveat applied to that where maybe these pitchers are facing minor league hitters or, instructional league guys or something like that. Yeah, that's going to inflate their strikeouts a little bit. But it is still something where if you notice that a pitcher, is all of a sudden overpowering a lot of hitters or, has that velocity increase, something like that, those are developments worth watching. Batting average, home runs, ERA, all those types of things, not worth watching at all. Those have no bearing whatsoever in spring training. But some of the other things like batted ball type, strikeouts and walks, and exit velocity are things that you can point towards as having some degree of reliability in spring training. Speaking of spring training, a few notes here on some injury updates. All of these pitchers, and really I only focus on the pitchers because, hitters will get shut down for a sore groin, something like that. They don't need the reps to be ready for the regular season. So we start with Carlos Carrasco, the pitcher for the New York Mets that they acquired in the Francisco Lindor trade. And the thing for Carrasco is that he had some issues maintaining his velocity early last season. It was something I was very worried about, something I was following very closely. Well, Carrasco has some elbow soreness here in spring training with the Mets. I don't know if they've gone the MRI route yet. It was just an update that I saw. And again, I was out of the loop for the most part in the last few days. But he got a late start to spring training anyway because they did some extra intake protocols with him having had leukemia and treatment for that 2 seasons ago. So he's a guy that already got a late start. Now he's got some elbow soreness, and teams are always very, very careful with elbow soreness. He is a past Tommy John guy. I think it was 2011, 2012, something like that. But I would presume at this point in time with Carrasco, we're not looking at him until probably late April, early May. So I would speculate that he's going to miss 3 to 5 starts or so. So keep that in mind as you're handicapping the Mets here, as you're looking at drafting Carrasco, because they're going to ramp him up very, very slowly, a very important cog in this rotation. I would expect his season gets off to a late start, probably 3 or 4 weeks behind everybody else at this point in time. The Cardinals announced that Alex Reyes will be in the bullpen around the same time they announced that Miles Mikolas has some shoulder soreness. And Mikolas is a guy who missed the short season last year with a flexor strain in his right arm. Now he's got the shoulder issue. He doesn't have much of an upside anyway. There's not a ton of ceiling here to Miles Mikolas. But the reason you pay attention to these things, and I'll group this with Zach Britton as well for the Yankees, who's out at least a couple of months after having arthroscopic surgery for some bone spurs. The Yankees have depth, and St. Louis has a lot of pitching depth as well. One injury in isolation is one thing. But when you start getting these cluster injuries, these groups of injuries with a certain part of the ball club or just the ball club as a whole, that's when it becomes really problematic. So for Miles Mikolas here, I think this is a worrisome development. I don't think he's a guy with a high ceiling or anything like that. But it's a concerning thing for the Cardinals who, do have a lot of guys with some injury risks and some injury red flags on that pitching staff. The Britton one is a bummer because the Yankees have a really good bullpen. And if more guys wind up getting dinged and dented here in spring training or early in the season, that will be a problem for them. And Britton, one of their most reliable relievers. So I am concerned about that. But some positive news for the Yankees here. Luis Severino recovering well from Tommy John surgery. I saw that the timetable for him is maybe late June, kind of early July, around the All-Star break. And I think this is important for the Yankees because you've got Jameson Taillon and Corey Kluber who have not pitched a whole lot here of late. And a lot of teams trying to navigate this post-COVID short season environment where you're probably not going to see a lot of 200-inning guys. You're probably not going to see a lot of bottom-of-the-rotation 175-inning guys. Teams are going to use a lot of different starting pitchers, try to steal some rest as they can. So a guy like Severino, if he looks good on the comeback trail, coming back in late June, early July, that could give the Yankees a significant boost for the stretch run. So while he's not a factor and not an option right now, could be something that down the line does end up really helping this Yankees team here as we go forward. All right, so with that, we'll get into the 5 and fly segment here. And as I said, my apologies, but a late start to the morning and then some computer issues that, fingers crossed, don't pop up here while I'm recording. Just going to do the AL Central for today. We'll do the AL West and the NL East next week. Sure, maybe just do the West next week and then combine 2 NL divisions. I don't know. I'll figure it out. That's a problem on my end. But we'll be doing these in the lead up to the season here. And what the 5 and fly is, if you're new to the show, if you're a new listener, it's 5 minutes on each of the 5 teams. So a 25-minute segment here to take a look at the American League Central Division. We start with the Chicago White Sox here, and their season win total in the low 90s, in that 91.5, 91 type of range. And they are one of the top teams in the AL in terms of the pennant futures and the World Series futures markets. So a lot of hype, a lot of expectation for this Chicago White Sox team. And one thing that I will say about the White Sox, and again, it's been very difficult to sort of figure out how much you want to take out of this 60-game sample, but they went 18-2 last year against the Tigers and the Royals. So they absolutely padded their record against some really bad teams. I think they were 34-26 in the short season. So they went 16-24 against teams that were not the Tigers or the Royals. So I think that's important to factor into the equation because instead of playing a third of their schedule against those 2 teams like they did last year, they'll only play 19 games against each one of them here over the 162-game sample. So keep that in mind with the White Sox here, who I think will be a good team. And I do obviously like the offense. I think the offense will be great. You've got, Luis Robert now in his second season. Eloy Jimenez should keep coming around. You get Adam Eaton back on the team. He's a very solid offensive piece and player. Jose Abreu off the MVP season. Tim Anderson is a good hitter. Yohan Moncada is a good hitter. They've got a lot of guys that, they hit for a lot of power. They do generate a lot of production. They will strike out a lot, but there's not necessarily a big negative connotation to striking out anymore, at least in the advanced metrics community. But they do have Nick Madrigal, who basically makes contact with everything. They've got Yasmani Grandal, who can walk. Adam Eaton doesn't have a very high strikeout rate. So this offense should cut down on that strikeout percentage here for this season. And I also think a guy like Robert will get a little bit better in that department. Jimenez, same thing for him. Jimenez cut his strikeout rate down by about 1.6% last year. I think we could see a similar decrease in his strikeout rate for this season. So this offense will be good. However, one of the things that we saw last season, and I just mentioned, they went 18-2 against the Tigers and the Royals. Both of those teams had very poor pitching staffs. Against the Indians in 10 games, the White Sox batted .206 with a .255 on base and a .355 slugging. So from a game-by-game standpoint here, right-handed pitchers with plus command and strikeout ability can hold the White Sox down. So if you want to look to fade the White Sox this season, to me, that's where you do it. You look to fade them against right-handed pitchers with above average to elite command and above average strikeout rates. Those are the teams those are the pitchers, I should say, that they will probably struggle against, if anybody. They will beat around guys that are below average. They will have field days against below average pitchers. And ultimately that will, increase their production level, probably make them a top 10 offense once again. But that is just something to keep in mind here, is that there is a blueprint to beating the White Sox. It's just that a lot of guys simply don't have it in Major League Baseball, which is why this team has such a high season win total here. What I'm more interested in, though, is the pitching staff. So they have a new pitching coach here in Ethan Katz, who was the assistant pitching coach for the San Francisco Giants. He was Lucas Giolito's high school pitching coach at Harvard Westlake High School in California. Also was the pitching coach for Max Fried and Jack Flaherty. So Katz is a guy that has worked with elite level pitching talent in his career, and then, of course, made his way to the major leagues. A big believer in the core velocity belt, and Lucas Giolito has increased his velocity over the last couple of years since reuniting with Katz in that regard. So that's what I'm looking at here. The pitching side. What is the new ceiling for this pitching staff with a forward thinker, more of an analytics-minded pitching coach? What happens with this pitching staff? How do they improve? Because the Giants were a team that saw increased spin rates across the board. So they had better stuff. We didn't necessarily see the results of it, but the guys had better stuff under the hood. Now, what happens when you increase your spin rate, though, is you have to throw things a little bit differently because there's the tighter, later break. The pitch shape is a little bit different. And what we see, and I'll talk about this with the Tigers, is what we see is that guys who have increased spin rates often have control issues early on in the year. So watch for that, where the White Sox, even though they're in a cold weather environment, could wind up being a little bit more of an over team early on in the season here. I do think they see some velocity spikes across the board as well. So I think that's a situation where the White Sox pitching staff has increased its ceiling. Certainly like the Lance Lynn acquisition. Dallas Keuchel is very solid, very underrated, good bullpen. But, again, one of the things that does concern me, and I'll talk about this more as we get into the season, Tony La Russa and how he works with this young roster, with this young pitching coach, and how those dynamics come together are something that does produce a little bit of a concern for me with the White Sox here. The Cleveland Indians, my hometown team, I'm very impartial, at least as much as I can be, on the show here with regards to the Indians. I love what the Indians do on the pitching side. I mean, Ruben Niebla, one of the best guys in baseball you've never heard of in terms of developing pitchers, getting a lot of these guys to the major leagues, and then having success. Matt Blake was another one, but he's now the pitching coach for the New York Yankees. The Indians lose Carlos Carrasco, and that hurts more on a personal level, I think, than it does from a production level. And Carrasco was very good last year, don't get me wrong. But Carrasco, a guy beloved in this clubhouse, beloved in this community. He does a lot for charity, did a lot of hospital visits and all of that. So he's a big loss in that regard. But I think the Indians are very confident in their ability to replace him. I think Cal Quantrill is a guy that people really need to have on their radars. Like I said, if you've got fantasy drafts coming up, I think Quantrill is 110% the type of guy that you want to take a shot on, because I don't think a lot of people will be looking at him. Really good stuff in an organization where pitchers maximize their stuff all of the time. I think Cal Quantrill is the guy you want to take a look at. Logan Allen, he's impressed in camp here so far. Seems like he maybe has the inside track to being the fifth starter. Tristan McKenzie, a guy that, look, McKenzie basically went 2 years without pitching and then had trouble with his velocity, saw velocity decrease, couldn't really sustain it late in the year. The Indians will be very careful with him. Now, with the delayed start to the AAA season, I think McKenzie does break with the team, but, maybe we see him in a relief capacity, something like that, until they can get him stretched out down in the minor leagues. The buy sign is very bright for Aaron Cevalle. Aaron Cevalle, if you look at the side-by-sides, and these are out there on Twitter, Cevalle's arm action and his delivery now looks like Shane Bieber's. It's a lot more efficient. It's a more direct path to the plate. And we've of course, seen the leap that Shane Bieber has made, being the reigning AL Cy Young Award winner. So do we get a big leap from Aaron Cevalle? I think it's possible. Cevalle has some of the best command on the staff. If he gets an increase in swings and misses, and now he's throwing more of a split change, that's a guy whose stock is on the way up. So you've got him. You got Zach Plesac, who looked really good in the sample outside of, violating COVID protocols. You've got Bieber. Quantrill's a guy I think has a lot of upside. Allen and McKenzie in that fifth spot battle. I think both of those guys have some promise and some potential as well. This will once again be the best part of this ball club, this starting rotation. And the bullpen looks strong once again. They bring back Phil Maton. They bring back James Karinchak, who's, the real-life version of Ricky Vaughn. They've got Emmanuel Clase back now, the hard thrower who missed all of last season because of a positive test for a banned substance. They brought back Ali Perez, a guy that's been, pretty good for them. Nick Whitgren, I don't know how he gets outs, but he does. This pitching staff will be really, really strong. And I think defensively, there are some things you can look at here for this team where they may fall off a little bit, but, they could be better too. I'm not entirely sure. Losing Carlos Santana at first base is a big deal. He was a Gold Glove caliber guy. But, I think they'll probably be okay at first base. The major question for the Indians, and this is, kind of the eternal question since they graduated out of those 1990s teams, will they hit? Will the offense be here for this team? Because as good as they are developing on the pitching side, they are pretty much that bad developing on the position player side. They've had a lot of first-round picks that have never gone anywhere. They developed Jose Ramirez, credit for that. Everybody knew Francisco Lindor was going to be a star, so I don't really think there's too much you can take away from that. But they just don't develop above average major league hitting at a high rate. So what they have to do is try to poach it from other teams. So they bring in Andres Jimenez in that Francisco Lindor deal with the Mets. And Jimenez is a guy that has been nothing but rave reviews in spring training. So he'll be the starting shortstop. That puts Ahmed Rosario into a super utility role. But you wonder here, beyond Jose Ramirez, who is an elite hitter, who steps up? Does Franmil Reyes finally show that power production, finally hit more fly balls, and tap into all that offensive ability that he has? Because he makes a lot of loud, violent contact, too much of it on the ground, though. Will it be Josh Naylor? Who will it be for this team? Can this Indians team win a lot of 3-2, 4-3, 5-4 games? Because they're not going to hit for a lot of power. Will they manufacture runs in an environment where it's increasingly difficult to do that? I don't know. So big questions with the Indians. I think their floor is pretty high with that pitching staff, but their ceiling, I don't know where that is exactly. And their season win total 81.5. I don't know. I mean, I think they should be better than that. They usually are. They maximize a lot of production out of their players, but I couldn't bet it. I don't know where this offense is going to be when all is said and done. Running a little bit behind as far as the 5 and fly goes, so I can probably save a little bit of time here with the Detroit Tigers, who are in a full transitional phase, and their season win total in the upper 60s. They're sending out the old, overpaid guys, the bad contracts. They're welcoming in some young guys. Offensively, I don't know who hits for this team. Miguel Cabrera is a very average player at this stage of his career, making a well above average salary. He's just a sunken cost at this point. Thought it was interesting, though, that Miguel Cabrera, I read some stuff over at The Athletic about how, he's just trying to embrace this role of being a leader and a veteran guy on this team. So maybe that helps. Maybe he helps some guys with some hitting, because I've never seen a right-handed batter, except for Manny Ramirez. I've never seen a right-handed batter like Miggy with the right center field power like he has. Really impressive. He's a Hall of Fame player. Hopefully he gets to 500 home runs and 3,000 hits, but he's a Hall of Fame player even if he doesn't. So maybe that helps this team. Maybe he's sort of a coach on the field, so to speak, with the Tigers. Heimer Candelario had a big breakout last year in the short season, but how legitimate is that? I don't know. They bring back Jonathan Scope, not a guy that gets on base a lot, but hits for a little bit of power. This will be a bottom 5 offense, maybe bottom 10. Bottom 10 would be the ceiling for them. Bottom 5, sort of where I expect them to be. They don't really have the guys that are close to Major League ready on the hitting side that they have on the pitching side. So we'll see how things kind of develop with the Detroit Tigers offensively. But for right now, it certainly looks like a very poor unit, a lackluster unit, I would say. But the pitching staff here, this is where the upside is for the Tigers. And you wonder how they're going to handle this, because some of these guys didn't pitch last year. Some of these guys didn't pitch very much last year. They pitched at the alternate training site facing the same 9 guys every day. So what do they do with Casey Mize? What do they do with Matt Manning and Bo Burrows? And unfortunately, Alex Fado and Joey Wentz, coming back from major injuries. So could be a lost year for those guys as well. Tarek Skubal, he's going to be in this rotation in all likelihood. But what do they do with these guys? I mean, do they give them some major league reps in April, send them down to AAA in May when the season actually starts, let them hone their craft, let them be the most dominant AAA rotation in the country? I don't know what their plans are going to be just yet, but I'm sure they have one. And that's the nice thing about this Tigers team now. With the hiring of A.J. Hinch, which I wish Terry Francona would have retired, because A.J. Hinch is a guy that I greatly respect. Yeah, I know there was the scandal with the Astros and all of that, but the way A.J. Hinch talks about baseball, talks about managing, I think this is going to resonate really well with this young Tigers team, with this Tigers pitching staff in particular. And Hinch is a guy with that Astros background. We know all the special things that they do in terms of pitcher spin rates, drafting and developing, all these types of things. I think this is a really good fit for a Tigers team that's hoping to build something up where, they spent a ton of money for a lot of years trying to build a winner. And now they're seeing what the fallout is from that. You try to make that big push. You try to do what you can to get that World Series title. And when that bubble bursts, you are really bad. And you're left with veterans that are not worth the money. And that's kind of where Detroit is right now. And they are sort of getting themselves out of that predicament, but they've still got a couple of years to go. Now, Spencer Turnbull is a guy that I love. And this is a guy that had increased spin rates last year and had a big walk rate early on in the season. And this is what I'm talking about. When you make one of these changes, and we won't see this watching the game. You'll have to look at the data over at Baseball Savant to see this. A guy like Turnbull increased his spin rate, but he couldn't harness it. He couldn't control those pitches. So the stuff was great, and the command was pretty good, but the walk rate was high. He's an extreme ground ball guy, so you don't want the walks because balls leak through and suddenly you're going first to third and all that. But he really fixed it in the second half of the 60-game season. So I'm buying Turnbull again. Maybe Matt Boyd turns it around. Maybe he doesn't. But again, a lot of these guys are placeholders like Fulmer and Urania and stuff like that. They're placeholders for the young arms, and we'll see how quickly those guys actually get to the big leagues. Next here, the Kansas City Royals. And I did bet their season win total over. I'm having some mild second thoughts about this team because the margin for error is pretty thin. Brady Singer, Chris Bubik, excellent last year in the 60-game sample. And it was awesome because the Royals took a very aggressive approach to the development with those two guys. Those were guys that had not pitched above high A or double A. But there they were in the major leagues getting 10 and 11 starts. And I love that. I love seeing that from teams that, look, the Royals aren't making the playoffs this year. They weren't making the playoffs last year. But you don't want a year to go to waste. And so with John Sherman, who made a big financial commitment to buying this team, then also going out and isolating free agents, kind of opening up the free agent market with Mike Minor and Carlos Santana, this Royals team is making commitments here. And the idea that they would go ahead and start the service time clock for some of these young pitchers very early in the process is exciting to me. And I think it speaks to what the Royals are hoping to achieve here in pretty short order of graduating guys to the big leagues, getting them out there to take their lumps, seeing where they stand, and not using these minor league data points to, formulate your opinions about these players. I love it. Now, the downside risk here is that because it was a 60-game season, because Singer and Bubic only threw, I think in the 55 inning range, I don't know what they look like here playing the full 162. I don't know how long they'll be out there. Will they have an innings cap at 120, 140, 150? I don't know. So that's the worrisome thing for me about the Royals, and something maybe I didn't factor in enough thinking about them and betting the over. But I do like the talent that's here. Brad Keller is a guy that I have underappreciated because I didn't really realize all the things that he was doing under the hood that made him a really solid pitcher. I knew he was a high ground ball guy, but he also had a low strikeout rate and all of that. But he throws multiple variations of his fastball. It sinks, it cuts, it rises, it moves, all of that. Really what pitching is predicated on these days, swings and misses. And if you can't do that, you miss the barrel. You do whatever you can to miss the barrel. You slide off to the end of the bat, you get down on the trademark, you do whatever you can do to limit hard contact against. Brad Keller is excellent at doing that. And so he's a guy that I think is legitimate front of the rotation personnel for this Royals team. And that's something that I didn't really realize until I did a deeper dive on him here this offseason and was very impressed with what I found and what I came away with. So I like Keller. I think Singer and Bubic have some upside. Minor, I'm not buying a ton of stock in him, but he's back in a place that he's familiar with, a very good defensive team as well. And this is important, I think, that the Royals could be excellent defensively. And one of the things that can be an equalizer with a starting staff and a bullpen that, maybe doesn't jump off the page as much, if you convert batted balls into outs, you can be a really good pitching staff. And the Royals, I think, will have good success with doing that. But what I like here is I like this offense. I think this offense is poised to make a pretty big leap. In the 60-game sample, Jorge Soler and Whit Merrifield were not very good. They did not match their 2019 production levels, but Soler's contact quality was still pretty similar. His problem was he struck out a hell of a lot more. If he can cut that down, and I think facing more teams across the league instead of teams that have the full book on you will help Soler. So I do think he's a guy, maybe a longer shot for the home run king, but also I think he's just a guy that simply gets better here this season. Merrifield should be good. I like the Benintendi move. I think Andrew Benintendi will be an above-average offensive piece for this team. But when you look at what happened last year, they got a lot of garbage production from Alex Gordon and Nicky Lopez and some of these other guys that even if their replacements aren't league average, they're going to be 20 to 25% better offensively than guys like Gordon and Lopez were. So that's a big deal. That really increases the floor for a team. And I think the Royals could win, 77, 78 games here this season. So I do like their over season win total 72.5. Again, not a team loaded with depth, but a team that if they stay healthy, I do like a lot of the personnel that they have. And one more thing specifically is that their bullpen last year was much better. 6th in strikeout percentage. They found bullpen arms there, and that's always an important thing because if you're going to bet overs with low season win totals, you have to be confident that those teams can win the games where they have a lead, and I do think that the Royals can do exactly that. Last team here for the American League Central is the Minnesota Twins. The 2020 season for the Twins was quite interesting. They won the division at 35-25, but offensively, massive offensive regression, just enormous. I mean, they set the record in 2019 for most home runs hit in a season. Now, 4 teams did exceed what the previous record was, but the Twins were the team that led all of baseball in home run hitting. Last year, in the 60-game sample, they went from 2nd to 18th in batting average, from 6th to 20th in on-base percentage, from 2nd to 14th in slugging percentage, from 2nd to 15th in WOBA, weighted on base average, and from 3rd to 16th in WRC plus, and finally, 4th to 19th in strikeout percentage. So this Twins offense went from being one of the best in baseball, a top 2 offense, top 2, top 3 offense in 2019, to being average or below average in a lot of categories last season. And what happened? They still outlasted the Indians and the White Sox for the AL Central. Now, what happened? Why did they have such a big drop-off? Well, their strikeout percentage increased by almost 4%, I think. They went to 24.4% from 20.9 or something like that. So about 3.5% increase in strikeouts. So that really hurt a lot of their numbers across the board. Their slugging percentage fell 67 points. Now, part of that was the K percentage increase. Part of that was some bad luck because they still made pretty good contact overall, but just didn't have as positive of results. But all in all, I look at this team, and they've had some guys kind of come in and out and all that, but I don't think a league average offense is the new normal for them. I think they get back to being a top 10 offensive unit here. So I am a believer in the Twins offense. Now, on the pitching side of things, obviously the big pitching gains with Kenta Maeda. They bring over Maeda. He stops throwing the fastball, throws more sliders and changeups, was in the mix for the Cy Young. I mean, Shane Bieber just had a ridiculous season, but Kenta Maeda was right there. Now, can he do that over 180 innings this season? I don't know, but look at this team. Jose Barrios added some velocity, K percentage increase. I think there are some leaps here that this team can make for this season on the pitching side. And offensively, I expect them to get back to where they were. So the Twins, they may do the 5-and-fly approach. You know, they get Jay Happ, they get Randy Dobnak, they get Matt Shoemaker. They may go 5-and-fly outside of Barrios and Kenta Maeda here, but I think they have a lot of upside. They bring in Josh Kalk from the Rays. They've had him for a couple of years now, but Rocco Baldelli was a Ray, learned in the organization. They've got a deep bullpen. And if they have to do the 5-and-fly thing, they can do that. But I do think this Twins offense gets better. I think we see the pitching gains from them, and they are a team that I think is worth a buy here to win the AL Central in that plus 140, plus 160 type of range, where the White Sox are good, but I do have some concerns about them for this season. So as I said here, we'll do the 5-and-fly with the AL West next week, along with lots of NCAA tournament shows here on ATS Radio. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Have a happy, healthy, safe weekend. Check out the 2021 MLB betting guide, and I will talk to you again on Monday.